Bartholomew Kuma stands as one of the most enigmatic and tragic characters in One Piece. Known to the world as Kuma the Tyrant, the ruthless warlord who terrorized the seas under the world government's authority, the reality of his character is a lot more layered and heartbreaking. Beneath the image of an unfeeling giant is the shadow of a man who once fought for freedom, who loved deeply, and who ultimately sacrificed everything for both his cause and his daughter. What makes Kuma's story so compelling is the constant tension between perception and truth. To the outside world, he was a monster, a towering revolutionary turned government dog, feared as a pacifista weapon, but to those who knew him, he was a protector, a father, a martyr. His very existence embodies the paradox of power, wielding immense strength while being stripped away of his very freedom. A man who could repel anything with his pawpaw fruit, but he couldn't repel the chains of fate. In the narrative of One Piece, Kuma's role is pivotal, yet often understated. He doesn't dominate panels with charisma like Doflamingo, nor does he broadcast ideals loudly like Whitebeard. Instead, Kuma's presence is quiet, calculated, almost ghost-like. When he acts, the story shifts in seismic ways, saving the Straw Hats at Sabaody, protecting the Thousand Sunny for years, and ultimately becoming the emotional anchor for Joey Bonnie's character arc. Kuma's complexity comes from the layers Oda slowly peels back. At first glance, he seems like another cold warlord, a living weapon serving the oppressors. But as truth unravels, we come to see him as one of the most human characters in the entire series. Someone who bore unimaginable suffering in silence so others could be free. This introduction to Kuma's character story will explore these paradoxes and layers in depth. We'll examine his fearsome public image as the tyrant, his symbolic devil fruit powers, his heartbreaking role as a father, and his transformation into a pacifista. More importantly, we'll look at the broader themes of his story: sacrifice, identity, the meaning of the freedom in a world ruled by oppression. Kuma is more than just a side character in One Piece. He is a mirror reflecting the cruelty of the world government, the resilience of the human spirit, and the cost of protecting those we love. His tragedy elevates him beyond the archetype of a pirate or revolutionary. He becomes a martyr, a man whose silence speaks louder than words, and whose impact leaves one of the heaviest impressions on Luffy and the Straw Hats. Bartholomew Kuma's most enduring title is Kuma the Tyrant. In the eyes of the world, he was a brutal warlord whose massive frame, cold demeanor, and devastating powers earned him a reputation of being a merciless destroyer. His very name invoked fear. A towering figure in a Bible black coat, bearing a weaponized paw insignia, appearing at the command of the world government to crush pirates and rebels alike. I mean, let's be real, that's kind of terrifying. But this image of tyranny was carefully cultivated by the world government. By design, they needed Kuma to serve as both a deterrent and an enforcer. His reputation as a tyrant masked his true affiliations, though, and his inner humanity. And this allowed him to act as kind of a double agent of sorts. The irony, of course, is that Kuma was anything but a tyrant. Beneath the fearsome exterior was the man of faith and compassion, and sacrifice. Don't forget sacrifice, kind of a defining feature of his. Yet to survive in the ruthless theater of power that the One Piece world is, he had to wear a mask of a monster. Kuma's reputation also reflects one of Oda's most recurring motifs: the danger of perception. Many of the most morally complex figures in One Piece, like Nico Robin, Jinbei, and even Luffy, have all been branded as threats or demons by those in power. Kuma's case is the most extreme, though. The label of the tyrant completely distorts how the world views him. To the average Marine or citizen, he is a villain of absolute cruelty. But to the Revolutionary Army, his daughter Bonnie, and anyone who actually does know him, he's a hero who bore unimaginable suffering for their sake. His behavior reinforced the perception, though. Kuma rarely spoke, and when he did, his words were chillingly calm, like when he was asking Perona or the people on Thriller Bark, if you could take a vacation anywhere, where would you want to go? Bloop. It's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. But he never needed to roar or posture. His quiet tone and robotic obedience amplified the myth of a merciless tyrant. Unfortunately, his coldness was an act of survival, a mask that hid both his revolutionary intent and his humanity. The tyrant image also serves as a narrative purpose. When Kuma first appears in the story, we as readers accept this label at face value. We fear him as the Straw Hats fear him. We think he's just another insurmountable wall of the world government's power. It's only later that the truths kind of reveal themselves, and we realize the tragic deception. This reversal heightens the emotional impact of Kuma's character. We realize way too late that the supposed tyrant was in fact one of the kindest souls in the story. And in this way, the tyrant persona is one of the greatest examples of Oda's mastery of misdirection. By disguising Kuma's compassion beneath the mask of fear, he forces us to confront the question: how often do the world's tyrants hide stories of sacrifice we never see? Kuma's tyranny was never real. It was a narrative imposed on him by those in power and a mask he bore to protect those he loved. Kuma's abilities come from the Nikyu Nikyu no Mi, or pawpaw fruit. One of the most conceptually unique devil fruits in One Piece, honestly. It's pretty freaking cool. At first glance, it seems almost whimsical. Paw pads embedded on the palms of Kuma's hands that allow him to repel anything he touches. Yet, beneath its unusual surface lies one of the most thematically rich abilities in the series, much like Doflamingo's strengths. An ability that reveals layers about Kuma's identity, his purpose, and his sacrifice. On a physical level, the pawpaw fruit's terrifying. Kuma can repel people, objects, and even intangible forces like pain and fatigue with just a touch. He could deflect cannon fire, crush enemies with shockwaves, or send a person flying across the globe at the speed of light. Not really the speed of light. In battle, this power makes him nearly untouchable, a living wall who could dictate the flow of combat with ease. His iconic question, where would you like to go on a trip, turned his ability into a nightmare for opponents, who would vanish without a trace, seemingly erased from existence. But the true brilliance of Kuma's power lies in its metaphorical weight. The ability to repel pain, suffering, and even fate itself embodies the essence of Kuma's character. He is a man who bore the world's burdens, who carried the suffering of others silently. When he pushed away Luffy's agony at Throw the Bark and transferred it into Zoro, we see not just a demonstration of his power, but the symbolic truth of his existence. And we didn't even know it. Kuma is someone who tries to carry others' pain, even at the cost of his own humanity. The act of pushing away also mirrors Kuma's life trajectory. He pushes away his role as a pirate by joining the revolutionary. He pushes away his autonomy by striking a deal with the world government. Ultimately, he pushes away his very humanity, surrendering himself to the Pacifista Project in order to protect Bonnie and the cause he believed in. Each use of his power echoes this theme, the continuous sacrifice of self for the sake of others. There is also a tragic irony in the fruit's nature. The pawpaw fruit gives Kuma the power to repel almost anything, yet the one thing he can't repel is his own fate. He can repel pain, but not the suffering inflicted by the world. He can repel enemies, but not the chains of oppression binding him. His power is limitless in combat, yet powerless against the true forces that destroy him. In this sense, the fruit becomes a cruel metaphor for the paradox of freedom. He can send others anywhere in the world, yet he himself is trapped. Finally, Kuma's powers carry deep, religious, and symbolic undertones. He often carries a Bible, a rare and deliberate design choice by Oda. The image of a man who can bear the pain of others, who sacrifices himself for their freedom, and who is ultimately crucified in silence by the world government, parallels the archetype of the suffering martyr. His powers, then, are not just a tool, they're a physical embodiment of his role as a Christ-like figure in One Piece, the one who carries burdens so others may live freely. In this way, Kuma's abilities elevate him beyond the role of a warrior. They transform him into a symbol. Every time he raises his massive paw to repel an attack, it is not just an act of force, it's an act of protection, sacrifice, and inevitability. His double fruit power reflects not only who he is, but the tragedy of who he becomes. Before the world knew him as a warlord or as a pacifista, Bartholomew was just a revolutionary. His life experiences being enslaved as a child in Maryswall, witnessing the cruelty of the celestial dragons, and carrying scars that never truly healed. They formed a foundation for his hatred of tyranny and his empathy for the oppressed. To Kuma, freedom was not just an abstract concept, it was a truth. He had been denied, and one he quietly dedicated his life to restoring for others. Kuma's role in the Revolutionary Army within Dragon's movement, Kuma stood as one of its most powerful and trusted figures. Unlike the flamboyant Ivankov or the idealistic Sabo, Kuma embodied the revolutionary's silent strength. He wasn't a loudspeaker for the cause, but a shield, someone who bore the weight of danger so others could act. His abilities made him indispensable. The pawpaw fruit allowed him to move comrades and supplies across vast distances, repel devastating attacks, and quite literally carry the pain of others. In a world where the Revolutionary Army was always outnumbered and outgunned, Kuma was their great equalizer. His presence alongside Dragon signified more than raw power, though Kuma symbolized what the revolution was fighting for. He was living proof of the cruelty of the celestial dragons, a man who had once been property, now standing free and strong against the world's mightiest government. In him, the oppressed could see the possibility of liberation. The quiet revolutionary, what set Kuma apart was his demeanor. Even among comrades, he was soft-spoken, contemplative, and carried himself with a calm that seemed almost saintly. He didn't preach ideology, he embodied it. His revolution wasn't in fiery speeches, it was in quiet action. And the way he placed himself between others in danger, and the way he endured suffering so others could keep moving forward, this made Kuma's revolutionary spirit distinct from Dragon's grand vision. Dragon sought to dismantle the system itself. Kuma sought to protect the people crushed beneath it. Together, their philosophies formed a balance within the Revolutionary Army, the strategist and the martyr, the voice and the shield. Kuma's revolutionary identity was also tied to his faith. Symbolized by the Bible he always carried, it was more than an accessory. It reflected his worldview, a belief in something higher than himself, whether that meant God, freedom, or the dignity of humanity. In the Revolutionary Army, this faith gave him an aura of calm conviction, a spiritual strength that steadied those around him. Foreshadowing his fate, ironically, Kuma's revolutionary resolve foreshadowed his eventual sacrifice. Long before he made his fateful bargain with the world government, Kuma had already embraced the idea of giving himself up if it meant others could be free. His revolution was never about self-preservation, it was about ensuring a future for those who could carry on the fight. In this way, his eventual transformation into a weapon wasn't a betrayal of his revolutionary ideals, but the tragic culmination of them. At the heart of Bartholomew Kuma's life is not his reputation as a tyrant, his role as a revolutionary, or even his sacrifice as a pacifista. It's his identity as a father. No title, power, or allegiance defines him more than this. His love for his daughter Jory Bonnie. If his revolutionary work represents his ideals, Bonnie represents his heart. And it's for her sake that Kuma makes the most devastating choices. Kuma's relationship with Bonnie is one of the most tender and tragic bonds in One Piece. Unlike many parent-child dynamics in the series where the child grows up resenting an absent or flawed parent, except Luffy, Bonnie's love for her father is absolute. Her memories of him are filled not with fear or abandonment, but with warmth. To Bonnie, Kuma was not a tyrant or a weapon, but a gentle, kind man who did everything to protect her. Despite his immense size and terrifying reputation, Kuma was gentle with Bonnie. Oda frames this contrast intentionally. The world sees a monster, but Bonnie sees a father who carried her when she was weak, who never stopped believing she deserved to live despite the sapphire scales that condemned her. This duality between perception and reality is what makes their relationship so powerful. The softer side of Kuma is revealed only in the quiet moments he shares with his daughter. The defining tragedy of Kuma's life with Bonnie's illness, the fatal sapphire scales in a world where medicine could not cure her, Kuma turned to the only option left, striking a deal with the world government in exchange for her treatment. He surrendered his freedom and body to the Pacifista Project. This moment defines Kuma more than any battle. It is the ultimate example of his role as a father. A man willing to sacrifice everything, his body, his mind, his humanity, so that his daughter might live. To outsiders, his choice may look like weakness or submission, but to Kuma, it was the only path forward. His decision reframes his entire life story. All the terrifying acts he committed, all the silence he endured, were not in service of tyranny, but in service of love. Bonnie's grief and humanization of Kuma. Through Bonnie, we as readers finally see Kuma's humanity in full. Her anguish over his transformation is not just sorrow for a father lost, but outrage at the injustice of his erasure. Bonnie refuses to accept the world's narrative of Kuma as a weapon. She remembers the man who carried her, who shielded her, who smiled despite his suffering. This perspective is crucial because it prevents Kuma from being remembered solely as a tool or as a martyr. Bonnie anchors his humanity in the story. Without her, Kuma could have been reduced to a tragic plot device. With her, though, he becomes something far greater. A father whose love transcends even the loss of self. The universal symbol of parenthood. Kuma's bond with Bonnie resonates because it reflects one of the universal truths. The love of a parent for a child in a world defined by power struggles, freedom, and tyranny. Kuma reminds us that sometimes the greatest battles are fought in silence for the people closest to us. His revolution was global, but his love was intimate. He fought for the world's freedom, but he sacrificed himself for Bonnie's life. This duality elevates Kuma's tragedy. He's not just a father who failed to protect his daughter, nor just a revolutionary who failed to topple an empire. He's both. And in that collision of roles, he embodies the weight of being a human in a world where freedom always comes at a cost. If Kuma's life as a revolutionary showcased his ideals and his role as a father revealed his humanity, then his fate as a pacifista embodied his tragedy. In the hands of the world government and Dr. Vegapunk, Kuma was systematically stripped of everything that made him who he was. His freedom, his body, and eventually his very mind. What remained was not a man, but a weapon. PX-0. The prototype for an army of emotionless killing machines. The bargain with the world government. The pacifista transformation began with Kuma's deal with Saint Saturn and the world government. To save Bonnie from the sapphire scales, Kuma agreed to surrender himself as the subject of Vegapunk's most ambitious project. At first, this arrangement seemed to allow for compromise. Bonnie's life was spared and Kuma retained his consciousness while undergoing partial modifications. But as the process continued, it became clear that this was not a negotiation. It was a slow execution of his identity. The tragedy lies in the inevitability of the deal. Kuma knew what awaited him. He willingly walked into fate worse than death, because his daughter's survival mattered more. Each modification wasn't just a mechanical change. It was a piece of Kuma's humanity being carved away in exchange for Bonnie's future. From man to weapon. The Pacifista program was the ultimate dehumanization. Vegapunk, under the government's orders, replaced Kuma's flesh with steel, his warmth with cold machinery, and his mind with programming. The very man who had once embodied compassion became a face of terror across the seas. Replicated endlessly into mass-produced weapons, his reputation as the tyrant was cemented not by his actions, but by the image the world government forced him to wear. Yet, even within this process of erasure, Kuma found ways to resist. His decision to program himself, or half Vegapunk, to protect the Sunny for the 2 years that the Straw Hats were gone is perhaps the purest act of silent rebellion in the entire story of One Piece, and it needs to get talked about more. Though his mind was being stripped away, his will to protect the next generation lived on. In that single act, Kuma ensured that Luffy and the Straw Hats, symbols of the freedom he once fought for, could continue their journey. The cruelty of erasure, what makes the Pacifista transformation so cruel, is not just the loss of Kuma's humanity, but the way the world remembers him afterward. History doesn't record his sacrifice for Bonnie, or his service to the revolution. Instead, he is remembered as PX0, the obedient dog of the world government, the strongest slave, a monster stripped of his identity. His true story is buried beneath layers of propaganda and silence, leaving only Bonnie and eventually the audience to mourn the man he truly was. This erasure parallels one of the central themes of One Piece, though, the control of history by those in power. Just as the Void Century was erased, just as the will of D is suppressed, Kuma's life is rewritten into something he never was. His humanity is hidden, his compassion twisted, and his memory weaponized. The martyrdom of Kuma and the end of Kuma's transformation into a pacifista completes his role as a martyr. He gave his body to the revolution, his freedom to the world government, and his very self to ensure Bonnie's survival. Few characters in One Piece embody such total sacrifice. Maybe Zeph. Where others resist openly, Kuma resisted quietly. By choosing to love, even as his ability to express that love was systematically taken away, Kuma's tragedy is not just that he lost his humanity, but that he lost it willingly, knowing full well what it would mean. His silence as PX0 speaks louder than any words could. The silence of a man who carried his burdens until nothing was left, for the sake of those who could still fight, live, and dream. For much of One Piece, Kuma operated on the periphery of the Straw Hats, but his impact on their journey is nothing short of monumental. His actions at key moments not only saved the crew from destruction, but also shaped the trajectory of their growth and survival. Kuma, the silent guardian, left an imprint on Luffy's crew that few other characters can match. Kuma's first true intersection with the Straw Hats occurs at Thriller Bark. In the aftermath of their brutal battle against Moria, the crew, exhausted, broken, finds themselves face to face with Kuma, the tyrant, a warlord dispatched by the government to finish the job. Yet, rather than crushing them outright, Kuma tests their resolve. His use of the pawpaw fruit to remove Luffy's pain and transfer it to Zoro, and results in one of the most iconic scenes in the series. It's one of those moments that I'm like, this is why it's my favorite show. Zoro silently enduring Luffy's suffering, declaring only, nothing happened. This moment underscores Kuma's complexity, though. He was there under the guise of obedience. He chose not to annihilate the Straw Hats. Instead, he revealed his compassion. Through action, acknowledging the Straw Hats' potential while forcing them to confront the weight of their captain's pain. In Sabaody, Kuma offers them salvation through separation. Faced with Kizaru, Sentamaru, and the full might of the Marines, the Straw Hats stood on the brink of annihilation, and what seemed like betrayal, Kuma systematically erased each member, sending them flying across the world with his devil fruit powers. But Luffy, this was devastating. He believed his crew had been destroyed before his very eyes. I mean, from his understanding, they just poof, gone. Like they were dead, each one, and he couldn't do anything about it. But in truth, Kuma had saved them. By scattering the crew to distant lands, he protected them from certain death, while simultaneously placing them in environments that would catalyze their growth. Each member faced trials that honed their skills, deepened their resolve, and prepared them for the challenges of the New World. Kuma didn't just save the Straw Hats, he forged the circumstances for their evolution. The Thousand Sunny, a final gift perhaps Kuma's most quietly beautiful act came after he had lost nearly all of his humanity. Before his mind was erased, he programmed himself, or requested Vegapunk to, with one final mission: to protect the Thousand Sunny until the Straw Hats returned. For 2 years, through storms, intruders, threats, Kuma stood alone as the silent guardian of their dream. This single act reveals everything about who Kuma truly was. Though stripped of his identity, he ensured that the crew's symbol of freedom, their beloved ship, would remain intact. It was a final gesture of love toward Luffy and his crew, a quiet acknowledgement of their potential to achieve the very freedom he had been denied. The unseen ally. In retrospect, Kuma's role in the Straw Hat story reframes his entire image. To the world, he was the tyrant who terrorized seas under the world government's banner. To the Straw Hats, he was the unseen ally who intervened at their lowest points, guiding them towards survival and growth. His silence masked his intentions, but his actions revealed a man whose heart aligned with theirs, a yearning for freedom and a belief in the next generation's right to chase their dreams. Kuma never sailed alongside the Straw Hats, but in his own way, he was part of their crew's survival. He carried their pain, scattered them for their own good, and safeguarded their future. For Luffy, who values loyalty and sacrifice above all else, Kuma's legacy stands as one of the greatest unseen debts in his journey to become the Pirate King. Kuma is one of the most paradoxical and tragic figures in One Piece. To the world, he was a tyrant, an unfeeling warlord who served as the government's weapon. To the revolutionaries, he was a trusted comrade, a shield who carried their burdens. To Bonnie, he was a loving father who would sacrifice anything to give her life. And to the Straw Hats, he became an unseen ally, shaping their survival in the moments of crisis. His legacy cannot be measured by titles or reputation because both were stolen from him. Instead, his legacy lives in the people he saved and the ideals he embodied. Kuma showed us that sacrifice is the highest expression of love, that identity can be erased but not destroyed, and that freedom remains the most precious treasure in the world, even when it cannot be claimed for yourself. In a story filled with dreamers and conquerors, Kuma is something else entirely, a martyr. He didn't chase the Pirate King's throne, nor did he seek glory on the battlefield. His journey was quieter, lonelier, and infinitely more heartbreaking. He endured chains so others could be free, bore silence so others could speak, and vanished so others could live. Kuma reminds us of one of Oda's most powerful truths, that the strongest characters in One Piece are not always the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who sacrifice the most. His story is not just the tale of a pirate, a revolutionary, or even a father. It's the story of a man who chose love in a world built on cruelty, and who paid the ultimate price for it. For that reason, Kuma's legacy endures, not as the tyrant, not as PX0, but as one of the greatest silent heroes in One Piece. Kuma's life is a reminder that freedom always comes at a cost, and sometimes the greatest acts of love are the quietest ones. So the next time you think of Bartholomew Kuma, don't remember the tyrant the world saw. Remember the father, the revolutionary, and the silent guardian who gave everything for the people he loved. But I want to hear from you guys. What's your favorite Kuma moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell to be notified. I'm the Story Sage, and every great fiction has deeper truths.